Morning guys, happy Monday the 11th of May 2020. So the Monday after Boris's most confusing coronavirus lockdown message, if you're trying to remember what day this was, if you're watching this at some time in the future. Anyway, Boris's confusing lockdown message is not what we're here to talk about today. What we're here to talk about today is dedication, commitment and motivation. So I know that as we've got deeper into this lockdown and as we come out of it into an uncertain, ambiguous time, as more and more races gets cancelled, it's going to be more difficult for people to find the motivation that they normally can and that perhaps they crave or they need to ultimately achieve their goals. Now, one of the things that we've tended to find with our Passion Fit community is actually, yes, motivation perhaps hasn't been as consistent as it always would be, but it hasn't dropped off that much, and actually people are starting to be quite motivated about what's happening going forwards. And there are a number of reasons for that, but we're going to share one of the concepts that we've been using with our guys a lot over the last 6 to 12 months that might help you. So basically that's around the commitment continuum. Now, we've talked about commitment continuum before. We've talked about how important it is that you're placed in the right position on the commitment continuum, and that if you're not, it can have quite a big impact on how you progress towards your goals. If you find that you're not placed well on the commitment continuum for a particular goal or process, it might be that the goal or process itself isn't right. And again, we've talked a lot about that. So let's just have a very quick reminder of the commitment continuum. So it starts with the resistant, people that just aren't bought in. So they're not bought into whatever process at all. So that might be somebody that isn't really even that bothered about the goal that they might have been set. Obviously, we see this perhaps quite a lot in school, I guess, where students might be forced to study a subject they're not interested in or they've got no desire to learn about. Then we've got reluctant, so people who aren't, so sort of wait and see really. They understand that maybe the goal is of value, it's important perhaps, but they're kind of waiting to see if whatever process that they've got to go through to achieve that goal is actually going to work. These people think that they're, in a good place often, but you're probably not going to be any more successful or progress any better than somebody who's resistant, to be honest with you, because you're not actually really doing anything. You're waiting for evidence that what you've been asked to do is going to work before you move forwards. Then you've got people who are resistant, so people who tick boxes. So those are the people that say, well, I turned up to training, I was there. I got in the pool. I turned up to class, but not really taking any ownership or responsibility at all. So they're just ticking the boxes really, maybe to placate the coach or even themselves. Then you've got people who are compliant, people that are doing what they're told to do. Those people are possibly going to progress quite well actually, but there will still be limitations to how far they can progress probably towards their potential. Not always, but most of the time those people are still going to struggle to unlock as much of their potential as perhaps they could if they were higher on the continuum. Then we've got people that are committed, so people that are internally motivated. So I guess the difference between committed and compliant, someone who's compliant is perhaps externally motivated, someone who requires somebody else to motivate them to do things. Someone who's committed is somebody that's internally motivated, somebody that's driving themselves forwards and isn't dependent on others for their motivation. They'll go the extra mile. They'll do a little bit more than perhaps the minimum to get there. And if you want them to do more, if they need to do more than perhaps you originally agreed to, they'll do that. And then you've got people who are compelled, people who do whatever it takes. These are often the people that sort of fall into that kind of lifestyle choice category where their goal forms part of their lifestyle choice. So ideally we want people to be in the top two, so people that are internally motivated or will do whatever it needs to be done. People that are compliant are okay, and of course people will move around this scale a little bit depending on other factors that they're experiencing in their lives and on their journey as a whole. But ideally we want people to function committed and compelled as much as they possibly can. The higher you function up to the top, up to compelled, or the more often you function in compelled or committed, the more progression you're likely to see against your potential. And that's the really important thing, against your potential, not necessarily against others. For example, it's about your progression towards your own individualised goals. We do have another category which often isn't talked about when you look at commitment continuums on the internet, which is obsessed. We talk about this one quite a lot, and it's quite high risk, particularly with what you'd class as high performing athletes, I guess. they can quite often become obsessed about the process. And in endurance sport, that's very high risk because it can lead to illness and injury quite often. Not always, but quite often. So that can lead to overtraining, and again, it's very common. We probably see more people that fall into that traditional high performance category at more risk of falling into obsessed perhaps than they might dropping down the commitment continuum. So it's very important that you as athletes and individuals and we as coaches look out for those kinds of warning signs. So everybody would be somewhere on the commitment continuum, but in Passion Fit we quite like to work with another scale, an alternative scale, one that sits alongside this, because quite often people might sit in compelled but still wonder why they're not progressing in the same way that others might be, that they perhaps see themselves as equal to in terms of talent or ability or lifestyle circumstance. And they get confused. They're like, well, I'm really compelled, I'll do whatever it takes. And you can't argue with that as a coach sometimes. You're like, yeah, you're right, you know, anything that you need to do, you'll do. You've made lifestyle choices to change, you've made sacrifices, you've given stuff up. So yes, you're compelled. But why are you not succeeding in the same way that others might be? And this is really comes back to a slightly different behaviour pattern, which is the difference between being reactive and being proactive. This is the reactive commitment continuum. So you can be reactive but still be compelled, if that makes sense. So somebody who will communicate with their coach, and if they find that there's an issue with their progression, something they're not doing, and their coach tells them that they need to do something differently or suggests them to do something differently, they'll do everything they can to make sure that that happens. But then you've got the people that fall into proactive, and sometimes the people that fall into these two categories don't even realise, to them it's just normal behaviour. So in the proactive commitment continuum, let me grab my pens. In the proactive commitment continuum, we've got some overlap. So what we've got is committed in the reactive often would align with resistant in the proactive. Then we've got compelled aligning with reluctant. We don't actually have an alignment really with obsessed because it's a bit of an odd one, that one. It doesn't fall into the pattern so well. Then we've got existent, and obviously we'll write in the rest, but it's quite obvious what comes as we go through this, because it's the same process, the same commitment continuum, but it's just underpinned by a slightly different behaviour trait. And there is one at the top, and we'll come to that in a second. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got the different levels of the proactive commitment continuum. So trying to explain this to people can be really difficult, and sometimes people can't understand when they look at other athletes who might be role models that they're doing something different when they're in this proactive commitment continuum. So let me give you perhaps an example. Someone who's in the reactive commitment continuum, say is potentially compelled, and you know as a coach will do anything they need to do, make the sacrifice they need to make to achieve their goal, comes to you with a problem, something that's not happening, something that's not working, maybe a niggle or an injury or something they're not progressing in. They come to you and say, look, I'm having this problem, coach, I can see that it's affecting my progression. I need to know what I need to do to sort it out. And you give them the solution and they go away and they do that. Somebody who's in a proactive commitment continuum would come to you with the same problem, but at the same time, almost certainly come to you with a solution also. So they would say, look, coach, I've got this problem, this is happening, I feel like it's affecting my progression, but this is the solution I've come up with, what do you think? Or I've tried this, and this is what I found has happened. Or, coach, I've been having this problem, I've implemented these solutions, could you have a look at that for me and see if you think that that's effective and working, and is there anything else that you would suggest? So that's probably the best way that I can explain the difference between somebody that sits in compelled on the proactive continuum and compelled on the reactive continuum. But quite often you can see somebody that's perhaps a little bit reluctant, waiting to see things happening in the proactive continuum still do as well as somebody who's perhaps compelled or committed on the reactive continuum. I've tended to see in my experience that kind of an overlap. Now, of course, it's not an exact science, but that's what I've tended to see. So sometimes people wonder why they're not progressing as much ipsatively towards their potential, and this is often why. But it can be very hard to recognise that you're not in this side of the scale. Now, what do we have at the top here? What we actually have at the top of the proactive commitment continuum is delusion. So people who are actually delusional. That's obviously, you know, not ideal either. So this is somebody that's really proactive, but perhaps is obsessive about the choices they make, the behaviours they make, the solutions they come up with. So people that are delusional about certain choices and the impact that they might have on their progression. And again, we've all experienced this person as coaches, the person who comes to you and has read an article about these new wheels or this new helmet saving them 5 minutes over an Ironman distance, and then they go away and they buy them thinking that's the solution, and you know, they think they're proactive, they think they'll do whatever it takes, and then the reality is that actually it's not going to have the impact it does, and they perhaps then lose sight of the other things that are really important. So they're proactive, but they're proactive because they're confused as well, and this puts them into a delusional sort of position, and that's really difficult to get your head around. So there's the two scales that we tend to use. Like I said, you know, it's too definite to say that yes, somebody who's compounded the reactive continuum will be the same as performance level as someone that's in the proactive continuum. That's not appropriate to say, but that's the kind of overlap that we've tended to often see, if that makes sense. So there you go, there's the continuum. So if you're wondering, if you think you're here in the top of this and things aren't going the way you need them to go or you want them to be going, perhaps it's because you're just not proactive. You're sitting in this reactive mindset and behaviour, and you need to be a bit more proactive about things. It's quite important, okay? And yeah, that's it. I hope you like our new kit, by the way. This is our new kit from Champion Systems. Our fundraising, Champion Systems have been fantastic, and they've managed to raise funds for a local domestic abuse charity by the production of this kit. It has been something we've only done internally, but I do hope you like it. And the hat as well from Bocco, who did the same thing. So at the same time, these two companies stepped up to produce a kit for our community to help bring them together, give them something exciting for this lockdown period during their indoor training, and also raise some money at the same time. And it's been really great. We've put that towards a domestic abuse charity because it's something that's quite close to home for us at Passion Fit, if you know our background and our past. So thank you to Champion Systems and Bocco for all that they've done in helping us achieve that, and thanks to all the guys in the community that put money into those purchases to help raise the money. So there we go, guys. Hope you have a good Monday, and we'll speak to you all soon.